just you almost like develop a little bit of a sense of imposter syndrome, right? It's like, did I actually like make all of this happen, or like, am I entitled to this? Do I deserve this? Right. And so you know, maybe, I don't know if it's like, I've had to check my humility a couple of times over my life. Right. So, and, you know, and sometimes you get punched in the face a bit by life as well. And so you maybe just like get a little bit gun shy. Right. And you're like, is this too good to be true? Like, what's the catch here? Right?
In today's episode, we have Daniel Foch, who took being conscripted into the Swiss Army to find his passion in real estate.
This is Building Billions podcast, where we cover the risks and rewards of success.
Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the Building Billions podcast. Excited to have you on.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, shall we talk about real estate and get to know you and your story?
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So,
well, that's a good thing.
I guess that's why I'm here, right? Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So, walk me through your story, how you ended up here, and then we'll go into the nitty gritty.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. Yeah. So I came from a real estate family. My parents were both in sales and investment, and so I did an undergrad in real estate. I mean, there's probably a lot more to the story before that, but let's maybe start at university when I was an adult, because it gets a little messy before that.
Oh, but we like a little bit of golden nuggets from before. Come on.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I mean, so true story. I was actually working in the horse industry. I was on a farm, and I planned to probably spend the rest of my life doing that. And I got the farm got hit by a tornado.
Okay, wait. What in the horse industry did you do? What specifically?
I picked up the rails, like when people were doing show jumping, they would knock down the rails. It's called ring crew. Anybody like who's in the horse industry will know what I'm talking about. But
I rode polo horses growing up, so
oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, so that's a more civil industry, I think, than the one I was in. But yeah, so well, I'm sure you know about when our CRA got hit with a tornado, and like, I don't know when that was, 15 years ago, maybe now. Anyway, so that kind of like ended things for me. And then I'm half Swiss, so I got conscripted to the military around the same time, and in Switzerland, went to Switzerland, did the military thing, and decided, okay, I'm not cut out for a full lifetime of physical labor after that experience, and so I decided to go to university. That was between high school and university. And then
Okay, wait, we have to dive into the Swiss Army. What was that experience? Please give me something.
Yeah, so in Switzerland, they conscript any Swiss nationals to have, they have a standing army. They're neutral, but they have a standing army. And so every man in the country goes to train when they're 18 years old. And so I did that. I moved there. I thought there would be value to having my Swiss citizenship, so I wanted to do what I could to keep it. And yeah, so I moved there. I didn't know the language. I didn't know what I was doing. And and I actually ended up being honorably discharged, but not like, not for any issues, but so I was there for a shortened period of time, but it was a really, really interesting experience anyway. Then I came back to Canada, did an undergrad in real estate.
Give me one takeaway from it, and then we'll move forward.
It just gave me, I would say, like, the big thing that it gave me an understanding of like the struggles that, I mean, in a country like Canada, especially, like the struggles that people moving here experience, like especially with language barriers and things like that. But even like, the minor variations of like where you can easily be left out of certain things in society or marginalized for language differences or cultural differences or whatever it is. I mean, it really shed a lot of light on that for me as a Canadian, right? Yeah. Yeah, it was good. Mm-hmm. So I guess the next piece was, sort of what we're here to talk about, which is I got into the real estate space like shortly thereafter. So I did an undergrad in real estate, and I was in the co-op program. So I got a lot of experience working in the industry throughout that, and worked with a couple of different, institutions. I worked at a REIT. I worked at a large commercial brokerage firm in the city. And then I knew I wanted to invest, and I knew I wanted to get into real estate sales and investment sales especially. And so I kind of just really tried to target a lot of my decisions on my career trajectory to get there. And I guess I'm kind of slowly getting there now, right?
Absolutely. It's all about the journey. So if you were to break down investment to someone who has no prior knowledge into it, when it comes to real estate investment, what are 3 things that someone has to look out for?
Yeah, so I probably have a different perspective toward it than most people, especially in the Canadian market. But I look at it very much like value investing, the way that you would somebody like Warren Buffett as an example. So the rule number one of value investing for Warren Buffett is never lose money, right? So I would say that that's probably the most important piece of the puzzle, and so that means focusing on properties that cash flow. And a lot of people say, oh well, the real money in real estate's made in capital appreciation, but the reality is properties that cash flow, properties that function well as investments will appreciate as well. Good assets appreciate, and so I think number one is never lose money. So let's call that cash flow. Number two is capital appreciation, but understanding how those two things can work in conjunction with one another. And then the final one I would think that most people need to get an understanding for is how leverage works, right? How debt works, how credit works. I think that real estate is a good investment, and you can very easily make it a bad investment if you are in a bad leverage position. Real estate doesn't bankrupt people. If you buy a piece of real estate cash, it's going to go up in value and it's going to cash flow. If you buy a piece of real estate with too much debt, then it can very easily, cause extreme financial stress for you. And we're seeing that happening at scale in the Canadian market right now.
Mm-hmm. What are you seeing right now in the landscape with everything that's coming?
I'm starting to see signs of distress. Like from a data perspective, we're seeing an increase in power of sales, like 100% increase in power of sales month over month. Yeah, which is like, it's still like less than 100 power of sales as an example on the Toronto Real Estate Board. So it's not a lot by any means, but we're starting to see signs of financial stress. I think Yahoo Finance just did a poll that 45% of variable mortgage rate holders would have to sell within 9 months, as an example. So I think that the leverage part that I just mentioned is starting to take its toll on the Canadian market. As prices went up, people had to use more and more debt to be able to afford those homes. We started seeing people using variable rate mortgages last year or I guess 2021 and 2022, because that would qualify them for a higher amount. It was the only way that they could buy a house in the GTA or in Lower Mainland or many parts of Canada. And now there's consequences associated with that type of credit product. And so we're starting to see financial stress. We're seeing prices are down a little bit, 20%, let's say. And I think the market's kind of just trading sideways and trying to figure out what happens next.
Are you seeing a slowdown in the investment market as well, or just because the pricing is kind of stabilizing to some extent? Are you seeing people jumping in more?
They're trying to, I would say, but so as a rule, you typically, and a lot of people broke this rule for the past several years, but as a rule, an investment typically can't be viable if the cap rate, so the cap rate is the net operating income divided by the purchase price of the property. It's usually the easiest way to look at properties side by side. It's a way to value property based on how much money it makes. So if the cap rate is lower than the interest cost, then there's a high likelihood that investment isn't going to be viable. And so right now we're at a point where cap rates, sellers' price expectations, so that the denominator of that equation that I just mentioned, they haven't come down enough yet to increase the cap rate, so increase the potential investment returns of properties that you can buy in the market today. And so what this has created is an environment where there are a lot of people who really do want to buy real estate. They've seen prices come down in the resale market, in the residential market, and they've said this might be a once in a lifetime buying opportunity. I've been waiting. I always thought the Canadian housing market was too risky. Now all of a sudden I'm thinking I would love to jump in, but I can't find anything that's a good investment, or I can't find anything that makes sense as an investment at current interest rates. And that is sort of where we're at right now, where the volume is really low because a lot of buyers want to buy, but they can't find a good deal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then within the market space, what would you recommend to people in this current juncture? Is it a sit and hold? Is it a explore certain opportunities? Where are we at?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are adopting a wait and see mentality. And I would encourage people who are waiting to probably also, rather than waiting to see, like actively pursuing, it's kind of like people come out of university with this expectation that they're going to find their dream career, as an example, but you kind of have to actively cultivate that. And it's like the same thing, like good, you don't just find good deals, you have to make them. Or you don't just find good investments, you have to make them. Like, I personally purchased a property in the past couple of weeks for 90% of asking price. And you didn't see that for the past 5 years, but most people they're not out there. Right. And most people, they aren't out there right now going in and looking at a lot of properties and throwing in lowball offers or bad offers or whatever it is, and putting in hundreds of offers before they find that one good deal. They're just waiting, and what they're probably waiting for is for the market to look like it's going up again, and then they'll jump back in. But the circumstances that would create that environment is, you're in a recovery phase. And at that point, everybody wants to get back in. The fear's gone. And so, everybody wants to kind of like time the market per se, but you can't really do that. And so the easiest way to think about it is, and this is how I advise most of my clients and any investors that I speak with, is when prices are high, there's very little potential upside above you, right? But there's tons of potential downside below you. And as prices come down, there's less downside below you and more upside above you. And so it's a lot easier to get a good deal on the way down than it is on the way up. But most people are too afraid to do so, because we have this really like herd mentality associated with this consumer sentiment in Canadian real estate. So just understanding the risk profile and knowing when to start looking for opportunities is really what I'm advising most people to do, and understanding that we're probably going to be at the bottom per se for a long time, like a year. The market's probably going to trade flat for like a year, and that's a good period of time for people to trade in and out of the market.
And would you suggest, if someone's sitting on the capital, that they invest, and then there are other opportunities like Airbnbs and other like sharing economy frameworks for you to invest in and keep the cash flow going?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think Airbnb is, an interesting example. I think it's somewhere between an investment and a side hustle. Like, it's definitely a little bit more management intensive but like renting to residential tenants, at least in the province of Ontario, can also be a bit of a side hustle, because it can be cumbersome as a landlord, because we don't have a really good court system to help, people manage that relationship well. I think that's maybe the most diplomatic way I can possibly say it.
With the last couple of years, also the tenancy board has gotten inundated, and there's a bit of a backlog.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, like Airbnb is a great way to boost your cash flow, but it is kind of legislatively becoming a bit of a risk factor. So it may not be something stable enough to say, okay, if this property only makes sense as an Airbnb, it might be a little bit too risky to put all of your eggs in that basket. And then all of a sudden the municipality comes along and regulates that income stream out of existence, which, we're seeing in Toronto right now, with, the city of Toronto cracking down on Airbnbs, and rightfully so. It's a big threat to the housing crisis and the housing stock. So you got to be careful with ones like that. I think, there are time tested and true. Yeah.
There is also the hotel tax. I believe the legislative framework is approaching it from a tourism board perspective as well, and the hotel lobby framework for it as well. That makes sense. In terms of a portfolio as a whole, what would you recommend for people to look at, whether it's commercial, residential, and other opportunities, even fractional ownership as well? Like, what are all the pieces that someone could have in their tool belt to explore?
Yeah, I think in the fullness of time, I think having a diverse portfolio is great. And if you can get a mix of, residential and commercial assets, it's, ultimately going to be a more stabilized portfolio. Even mixed use, like there's some great opportunity for stuff in Toronto where you have ground floor retail and maybe some residential or office above. The challenge with commercial assets is it's really sophisticated type of financing to get. So usually and there's nothing wrong with specialization, right? Like, returning to value investing in Warren Buffett, diversification is for people who don't know how to specialize in something. So you can be a specialist. You can be a specialist in Airbnb. You can be a specialist in cash flowing residential, as an example. I would say from a portfolio strategy perspective, if we're talking from the ground up in today's market, it's easiest to get credit for small residential multifamily. So fewer than 4 units is, after 4 units, most lenders start considering it a commercial loan and becomes a little bit more challenging to get financing. And then also from a policy perspective, there's a lot of policies that are encouraging the addition of value to small residential properties. So Bill 23 in Ontario, as an example, you can now, you eventually, ideally, will be able to add up to 3 extra units to a single family detached home without paying development charges. So development charges for a new condo unit in the city of Toronto would be like $60,000 to $90,000. So you get a competitive advantage against high rise developers, as an example. So that's usually where, like, right now, from a portfolio strategy perspective, I'm thinking, what does the world need? We know in Toronto we have a housing scarcity, and we're in the state of a real housing crisis. So what does the world need, and how can I provide that, create social value, but also create monetary value for myself, right? There's this Japanese principle of ikigai that's kind of like the intersection of all of these good things, right? And if you can find something like that from an investment perspective, I think that's good.
Especially if finding that intersection between passion and labor intensity. Like, you want to find the segue that you are comfortable spending those man hours and not questioning it, while actually gaining from it and not spending all hours of the day in it.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Almanac of Naval Ravikant also discusses, like, he talks about this a little bit, where, like, things that, like, ignite you a little bit more, you get impassioned about, you're more likely to do a good job at, right? You kind of, and it's like just the way your brains work. But like, I have really bad ADHD, so like, if I am not getting a dopamine hit from doing something, like, there's a chance that I'm just going to do a really bad job at it. So for me, I actually have to, like, be quite selective about what things I'm investing my time in, because otherwise I'm just going to be, like, really not doing a good job.
So let's talk about you then. Like, in that process, like, how did you decide that this was your passion? How did you come into this journey to now also run your own podcast, run your own, like, advice, like, firm? Like, where are you at in this space?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is, like, kind of what I just described. Like, I think I really just, like, chase the dopamine, like, go wherever, do what feels good for a lot. And as long as it's not, like, socially disadvantageous or, hurting other people, then I think that that's, like, probably what's going to get most people the furthest in their life. And I just kept repeating that process, and I almost, like, got this sense of, like, ProNoia at a period of time, because I was like, too many good things are happening to me, like the opposite of paranoia. Like, I was like, what, why?
Why do we as humans do that? Why do we question it when
Yeah,
it's going well?
it is a good question, actually. Like, I'm not necessarily sure, but I guess I just, you almost, like, develop a little bit of a sense of imposter syndrome, right? It's like, did I actually, like, make all of this happen, or, like, am I entitled to this? Do I deserve this? Right. And so maybe, I don't know if it's like, I've had to check my humility a couple of times over my life, right? So, and sometimes you get punched in the face a bit by life as well, and so you maybe just, like, get a little bit gun shy, right? And you're like, is this too good to be true? Like, what's the catch here, right?
Yeah, when's the next hook coming in? But when you have those moments in life, I wonder if that's our programming from childhood, or it's just a necessary step to help us check ourselves. But then at the same time, how do you manifest from that process? Like, how do you keep going to get through it?
It's such a good question. Like, I think that there's probably, the answer might be somewhere in the middle, right? Like, I think that, there's a healthy dose of, like, humility and things like that. Cause, like, I think that if I was, or, for anybody, like, if you're douchey about stuff, like, it's not going to help attract good energy, right? As an example. And so I think that humility is something that's attractive. People, like, really, they gravitate towards that, and genuineness, like, talking about content as an example. Like, I used to do, like, a couple years ago, I was like very much like every other realtor on Instagram, like just, lifestyle photos and this and that. And that works for some people, a lot of people actually, but it didn't for me. It wasn't congruent with who I was. And I was told by the industry that that's like what you do and how how you make yourself, how you brand yourself. But it as soon as I was just like, I like talking about charts and like I suck at production quality and like that's okay. Like, and I just found this niche doing green screens on Instagram as an example, or like just doing the podcast, that Nick and I are doing where it's two co-hosts just really like nerding out about real estate. Like those things succeeded because they're extremely congruent with who I am, not because like they're anything. I don't think that they fill a void or are really like a step above anything else. I just think that it was like I woke up and I could do it really well because it was exactly, I didn't have to put a hat on or put a mask on or change anything. I just did what I do, and it makes it easy, right? And it makes it
The
fulfilling as
irony is
well.
if you wake up and show up as you, the world actually responds. And oftentimes we're taught with a cookie cutter system, but it isn't actually what makes greatness. It doesn't make the end product that you actually want.
Yeah, I think that's that's an excellent point.
Yeah. What was that moment for you when you realized you were in the flow? Like you were in the right path. Give me a story there.
I think like when a lot of these things kind of happen like at the same time for me when I started doing this Twitter space, which is like one of my favorite mediums. It's kind of like Clubhouse. Like everybody knows about Clubhouse. Basically, Twitter did the same thing. And I just started just talking about the real estate market with like a group of, it was live group of, now it's thousands of people. Like I typically get 3,000 to 5,000 live listeners a week. So that I started doing that, and I just iterated that every week. And I started like talking about charts. I've been posting charts, doing a lot of primary research, and people were really respond. I was like, people like this stuff, and I didn't like. I loved it, and but I just never had a place to share it, and never had an audience of people who actually got value from it and responded well to it. And then I think once that started happening, like once people were like giving me requests for like different pieces of data that I could like find, on the Toronto real estate board, because they wanted to know the answers to these questions, or like there was all of these different things happening at once. And then TikTok kind of like became the same thing where it was like, I think a younger audience, a different audience, but really the same content. Like I literally just take a screenshot of my tweet and then like explain the chart that I've posted behind me. And so it made content creation for me exceptionally simple and rewarding. Like I was like, okay, this is very low input, very high impact. And once I started like being able to do that and being like, I know anything a news article can come out, a chart could come out, and I can make several pieces of, in a lot of cases, viral content. Like some of these are getting millions of views on different platforms. I can do that in 10 to 20 minutes and I'll enjoy it. That was like when I was like, wow, like everything just happened. It all aligned perfectly. And I think it feels like luck, because it in a lot of cases feels a little bit too good to be true. But like a lot of it was just iterating over and over and over again and failing and like seeing what worked. And then all of a sudden one thing stuck, and I just kind of got into, and I'm sure in like 2 years, like people are going to be sick of that type of content, and there's going to be a new trend or whatever it is. And I'll have to kind of recalibrate. But as long as I think you're trying and reiterating and like, then you can kind of fall back into that next thing, whatever it is. Right.
Let's talk about failure and confidence to keep going, because you have that grit, you have that determination to keep producing. You're like, okay, if the market changes or the platform changes, I'll just adapt. Walk through that process. How do you inspire someone to also do that?
I would probably just tell somebody that they're going to die one day and that they should probably try and live before they do that. Like, honestly, like, and I don't know, like, I don't want to lean in too much to like anything, like existential or whatever, but, like the Stoics talk about it. A lot of people talk about this in like life. It's like, I just became unafraid. I think, well, for me, it was like when I had, a kid. I have a daughter who's 6 years old now, and I just became shameless. I was like, I don't really care. I really only care if she thinks I'm cool, and I'm just like, and I just make money and put food on the table. That's my my job here. And so whatever means to do that, I'm going to do. Um,
Something unique happens when you have a child. That moment you have a child, oh, the whole world changes. Biological response.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's like a, yeah, for me, I was like a biological switch. Yeah. Yeah. Something happened for sure. Like I was a very different person before that. Not a good person, to be honest with you, but you know, like I think I developed a lot more in that moment. And I think, yeah, like to me, I notice this in my industry where there's like a difference between people who have like their personal Instagram account and then their real estate Instagram account. And it's like, I don't know why, or like people don't want to, they want to start like they name their like real estate business like something else, right? It's like, why not just carry it with your brand? Like be willing to fail publicly. I've done it several times. And like, I can tell you that nobody cares. Like nobody remembers the several things that I failed at in the past. Nick, who's my co-host on the podcast, same thing, right? If anything, people just will come to you now and be like, oh man, it's so crazy. Like that now it's nice to see that you're perfectly like in what you're supposed to be doing. Like I know you tried so many things and it's like you've got it. Like if anything, they remember it to contextualize that like you're doing the right thing now. But like I think a lot of people are just really afraid of like judgment. They're afraid of and a lot of it's like projection. Like you assume that people are judging you, but you're really just judging yourself. Nobody really gives a shit. Sorry if I don't know if I can swear on here, but nobody gives a poop. Yeah, nobody. Yeah, no, yeah. So nobody cares really, honestly. So, and there's a quote like this. It's like, you never, or you'll stop thinking about how much people think about you when you realize how little they actually do, right? I'm just like, that's kind of, I got lucky and that happened for me at a young age because I had a kid at a young age and I just stopped really caring what people thought.
It's a gift, honestly, because oftentimes people are, by doing that and having two different spaces, a personal and a professional, you actually are telling the world that you're not as confident with the thing that you're going after. And sometimes when you align everything and you are your brand, it really does signify that you're ready.
Yeah, no, it's true. You got to take ownership of it. And like, I think that it is like, if you're not all in, like people can feel that. It's like, I don't like, even if it's like a lot of people call it manifestation or whatever, but like there's biology behind this stuff. Like literally just like if you think about it, oh, I want to buy this certain car, right? Like, let's say I wanted to buy a Volkswagen Beetle, just as an example. You start seeing them on the road everywhere, right? We know like you have your brain has this thing called the reticular activation system that gives you the ability to focus on things that you've apply care to. And if you're not caring about things, then like you're not going to create the space for you to focus on them and be successful at those things. And people can feel that, right? So like I think as you do, as you invest more, take the risk, people, like I took ownership of everything and people respond so well to it. Like every day there's hundreds of people messaging me just random questions about real estate and I'm like, I love that. But I couldn't have done that if it was like some other brand where I was trying to distance it from myself because I was a little bit afraid that I wasn't going to be successful at it.
So then what's your advice to someone that is kind of in that pocket where they're trying to disassociate with their brand because they think that that's professional?
Ask yourself why you feel that way. Cause like if there's and like, it's not that you have to be defined by your work or anything, but like, what is social media really for? Like, is that your social life? Because that might be a problem within itself that you need to think about. But like, if it's not your social life, then is it a place that you use as a marketing tool for your brand? And if that ends up being, if that's what it is ultimately, if you're using it, then you kind of have to go all in on that to create a healthy like distance between business and social life as well. Like I don't socialize on social media. I don't at all. I don't really consume social media like either. But you can get in those habits of like flipping through and I've done it too. Like I get hooked on my phone for just because you're in the dopamine reward system. That's what it's designed for.
Yeah, we're circling back to dopamine.
Yeah, but really, like that's what I mean. It's all there, right? And I think like people got to ask themselves, like, why is that gap there? And like, is it because I'm not sure what if I want to be doing this forever, or if I'm a realtor, as an example, like, am I a little bit embarrassed that I'm a realtor because everyone in Toronto is a realtor, and like, when I'm out at a bar and somebody asks what I do, I say I'm in real estate, not I'm a realtor, as an example. Like what's the reason for the distinction? And then like, okay, you can kind of reverse engineer it, especially in a market like the one that we're in right now. Should I really even be doing this? right? Nobody really stops to ask themselves that question. And then if not, what should I be doing? Like what is the thing that I would be doing with my life that I would take pride in presenting to everybody in the world? And if I failed at it, I wouldn't have any fear of judgment. If you can't find that thing, then like you gotta, that's a whole problem within itself. But you kind of gotta like, that's sort of the journey of life from my perspective, is like, what is that thing that you should be doing? I got lucky because it's real estate, and I got lucky that I found it early. But I think a lot of people don't like realize that you can actually have that in your life.
Mm-hmm. And I also think that in a beautiful way, you were exposed to it from a young age. So you were able to find the alignment in something that you were exposed to. And oftentimes people don't know what's out there. So seeking it and running after it and trying everything is always a good place to start.
It is funny in that respect, though, because I think like, it took me a long time to realize that, like, the reason that I was working on a farm and going to the Swiss Army when I was a kid is because I didn't want to do anything that my parents did, right? And it wasn't until, I had a change in perspective by, being in the mountains in a country where I couldn't communicate with anybody because I spoke a different language, and hiking 70 kilometers a day with doing 70-kilometer hikes. I don't think it's possible to hike 70 kilometers in a day, but doing 70-kilometer hikes with, with a huge backpack
Yeah,
on.
I did Machu Picchu. I'm not doing that again.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, like, so I was like, oh, like my parents have an exceptional work-life balance and they're happy, and it gives them the opportunity to, travel a lot, and they can control their own schedules, and they like their clients. They're friends with the people that they work with. They can invest in real estate, and so I think in a lot of cases, maybe just a shift in perspective as well. Like, being raised in it was great, but it also, like, I grew up having like a resentment towards it. It was like, who works from home and who works all weekend and all of these things, right? And then all it took was like a little bit of a change in the lens I was evaluating it from, and I discovered something new.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned that you get asked questions often. What are the three most common questions that you get asked within real estate?
I mean, the big one is, how do I do my first real estate investment? So you get a lot of people who rent or own, and they want to get into investing in real estate, and so that's probably the biggest one. And the answer to that question is, go to a mortgage professional and find out how much leverage you can get to purchase an investment property. And once you've established a budget, then you go look at something. And if or you go find a place that you can buy a property that you can qualify for. Yeah, the other one would be like, what's going to happen with the market? And I don't really know, right? I'll be the first to admit that I have no idea. I think we can look at what happened.
Wait, you don't have a magic wand? Like, you can't predict it?
Yeah, no crystal ball. Yeah, no, it's. I think you just look at history, right? You can only, and we saw what happened in 1981 at the end of a housing cycle. We saw what happened in 1989. We saw even what happened in the GTA in 2017, or in Vancouver in 2016, when there was policy that dropped prices. So, I mean, pick one of those and tell me which one you think the scenario is most likely to emulate, and that's your outcome. Like, all I can do is share information. I actually don't really draw conclusions that often. And so, yeah, so that's another one. I think, I don't know what the third most frequent question would be. Like, what's the right time to buy, or what's the best product to buy? Probably would be the three. They'd be tied. I'll answer maybe the best product one. I don't know if you're even asking me to answer these questions, but the best product that you can buy.
I like it. You're going for it.
Taking the initiative. Yeah. The best product you can buy from an investment perspective is cash flowing, from my perspective, cash flowing multiplex, duplex, triplex kind of thing, on a large lot, ideally detached, on a major arterial road, ideally within like an hour or two of a major urban center. So we do a lot in Cornwall, Ontario, as an example, because it's an hour from Ottawa and an hour from Montreal, and you can buy houses on the main road. You can usually get it at a discount because end users don't want to live on main roads, and you can duplex it, let it cash flow for 10 years, and then you can eventually, because it's on a main road, likely develop that property into higher density. So maybe a 6plex or a 12plex or whatever it is. So that's the best investment you can make as a regular Joe.
I like the caveat. Thank you. Now, if you were a middle tier investor where you let's say hypothetically you had access to, and I say access to, 1.5 to 2 million run. What would you put it into? Would you diversify? Would you pick one? Would you?
I would probably buy a larger multifamily property that had add value potential. Like ideally have 50% vacant as an example. Like we had an offer on a 20 unit up in Northern Ontario that half of it was vacant and half of the rents were underperforming. There's the Canadian government is really, and most governments, like even in the US, if you have a large US audience, like there are a lot of um, lending policies in place to help the creation of multifamily housing, stable, good quality rental housing to help solve housing crises that exist in Canada and beyond. Most of North America, we're oversubscribed. More people want to live here than there are houses for those people to live in. So in Canada, we have CMHC's MLI Select program, which is basically mortgage loan insurance. That's what it stands for. And they'll insure large multifamily projects. It gets the interest rate way down. And you can also extend the amortization out to like 40 years as an example. So if you can buy it has to be more than 6 units. But if you can buy a property that's like that, or even a 5 unit and push it into 6 by adding a unit or whatever it is, then you can get access to this whole new type of credit, this whole credit product that is designed for making rental housing compelling for investors and landlords to solve the housing crisis. And so like understanding how things like this work is exceptionally important. And that's what I'm doing. That's kind of the phase of my investing career that I'm in. So mid-tier investor, 1.5 million capital. That's what I would be doing. Like we just did a 10plex with this program around the budget that you're talking.
Great. And then if you were to, let's go to a higher framework, if you had a 5.5 million runway, what would you do with that?
At that point, I'd probably be getting into, no, I think like at that point, I'd probably be getting into the development of housing. So I would be either building, for sale condos or, small ground based housing. I think like, you can typically, if you structure a development deal properly, you can typically get into a development deal with like 10% equity. So if you have 5.5 million cash, let's say, multiply that by 10, and that's kind of the project size you can take on. So you could build a 50 million ish. I mean, if you'd have to, there's some other, I probably couldn't do it, but if I brought in the right partners, I probably could. So it's not just a cash problem, but if if I could curate the right piece of land, bring in the right people to help me develop and build that, that's what I would be doing. Cause you're going to get a huge, like, that's where you really get into those, big alpha, big value creation things. Alpha being, like the big change in capital appreciation.
Yeah, the gains that you can make off of it are a lot steeper.
Yeah.
So then within this framework, let's say someone who is completely uneducated in the space, do they come to you, or what's their first step in this whole process? Is it going to the mortgage broker, figuring out what's going on with their level? Like, where are they at?
Yeah. So I'm typically, like, we do have a full service team, so we can take people through from mortgage all the way on the investment side. I don't really play much in the residential space, like with people looking for mortgages for that stuff. So a lot of the people that, I interact with in the real estate space like that, because I'm not really competing with other mortgage brokers or other real estate or realtors. And yeah, so people typically will reach out to me, and I'll connect them with my mortgage team, which includes Nick, my co-host, and then a business partner that we have that's kind of a little bit more behind the scenes. He's the real smart one, actually. He just doesn't like doing social media and stuff. And we'll basically get them qualified, and then we'll reverse engineer. Okay, you can buy, maybe, okay, I don't like my budget. Okay, well, what can we do? Can we bring in a partner? Like, is there somebody that you'd want to do a deal with, right? Friend, family, whatever. If not, then okay, you're gonna have to go back to the drawing board and save some money. But the first thing that you really need to establish is how much you can spend. Your budget comes first, and then you kind of reverse engineer from that. So if you can spend 150 or 200K, if that's all you can get qualified for, there are places you can buy cash flowing properties in Canada, or maybe you can buy in the States, right? Like I have guys buying in Detroit. They're buying cash flowing and properties and making ridiculous amounts of money, to be honest.
Walk me through the US cross border process for individuals.
Okay, yeah, it can be tough. So a lot of people, I can't even remember the name of the program, and it does vary on a state by state basis, but they have basically like a lending program for non-residents as an example. And there are different tax considerations, and most people that I know that end up buying in the States eventually want to move to or retire, like, so maybe snowbird in the States. And so if that ends up being the case, what they sort of they end up leaving most of their money there. So you're going to set up a corp in the U.S. You're not trying to get the money back across the border. There are ways to do that humanely or easily, but for the most part, most people want to leave their money there and expand their portfolio in the U.S. So making that assumption, you got to go typically just find a local real estate professional and mortgage professional, very much the same way I just explained to you that I would make somebody start in Canada. Find the professionals that you need to like build your team out there. And so, go on Zillow is probably the easiest place for people to start, but I find that usually the professionals that I find through that site aren't exactly what I need, but get introductions to agents and mortgage professionals in the local market. And usually choosing a market first is probably the easier way to do it. So do some macro research. What cities do you think have upside potential in rents? What cities do you think are going to grow? What cities where you think you're going to see capital appreciation? What cities do you have the cap rates that you want to buy at? Once you've answered all those questions, pick a city, find the people in that city, and then the rest of it's pretty easy to do after that. Just getting your deal underwritten, it's the same as, it's probably a little bit easier, to be honest with you, than actually doing a deal in Canada, because the US has just a completely different brand of capitalism, and they're very committed to getting deals done. And it's not super, it's just not, and it's just not extremely regulated, right? Like, it's just like they have thousands of lending institutions, where in Canada we have 6 major banks, right? Or, 20 or 30. So there's not a huge like scope of competition. We have a very oligopolistic market in Canada for most services. You have 5 telecom companies, 5 grocery stores, 5 banks, right? So the US is very different that way. So you can usually find people to help you get the deal done a lot of easier than you can in Canada.
Any other recommendations that you would have for someone looking at real estate from an investment portfolio, not as a place for them to live, but more so as investment?
Yeah, I think examine what the world needs right now and what you anticipate the world might need in 5 or 10 years. Like, everybody has a perspective on how they think the future is going to shape up and what they think the world is going to look like, and just take those things and evaluate them and kind of reverse engineer your investment strategy for real estate or for anything based on that. So if you think we're going to need more housing because immigration is going to perpetuate, and then buy housing. Or if you think we're going to see onshoring of a lot of businesses because of supply chain erosion, then maybe start looking into industrial businesses. If you think we're going to see lots of Etsy e-com people, needing small commercial spaces to run their business out of, then start finding a way to invest in that stuff. But I think real estate, very much like, and this the way I describe that could be geographically variant as well. So I think I'm very bullish on Calgary as an example versus Montreal. And if you can pick the right city, we're very much like in an economy where it's like a stock pickers market. In the States, or in the equities markets, you can if you pick the right stock, it could outperform the index substantially over the short term and long term outlook. Right now, with where we're at in Canada, seeing this turnover, seeing kind of the housing cycle come to an end, and we'll be in a bit of a trough for a bit. If you pick the right asset, if you bet on the right racehorse, then I think that there's a way that you could have life-changing money by outperforming the market. And it's just figuring out what that is. And I'm just as likely to get it wrong as somebody else, but establish your worldview and invest based on that, for sure.
And I think the beauty in real estate is that you can have cash flow. You can kind of mitigate some of the risks. What are the main risks that you see for a new investor to look out for, so that they don't burn their hand on the stove?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a great analogy because I think a lot of people, it's like scale and leverage are the two biggest risks. Most people want to do too much too fast, and most people want to do it with no money. And the barriers that are in place exist for a reason. You can't get high leverage because people have been trying to buy properties with high leverage for the past 100 years, and that's how the global financial crisis happened in the United States. That's how housing markets, housing bubbles happened and collapsed in Canada twice over the last 100 years. And so, I understand that leverage is the big risk in real estate. Real estate isn't the big risk. Leverage is the risk. And then understand that, you don't have to run. You can walk. You have to walk before you run. Like, a lot of people don't understand the management intensity of real estate. And so, like, because it's really not passive income at all. Honestly, it's completely impassive. It is a side hustle. It really is. Like, I'm talking to tenants regularly. I'm collecting checks regularly. I'm, you can't get a plumber on 3 days notice right now. So I'm, fixing toilets or fixing plumbing, right? Like, and having to cultivate those skills. So if you don't have those skills, like, and this is like with, tens of units, not like, I wouldn't say the group that I have is a small scale investor by any means, and we have management in place, but there's a lot of problems you can't solve. So understanding that piece as well, like that this is going to be time consuming, and difficult. I think those are things that people underestimate for sure.
Well, thank you so much for being on here with us. And if people were to look for you, where would they find you?
I have a relatively unique last name. So if you just Google me, Daniel Foch, Foch, you'll probably find me in the Google results on a platform that Google thinks you're most likely to click the link on. I'm pretty much on everything now. And if there's a new platform that I'm not on that you want me to be on, just send me a message on another platform and I'll give it a try. I like trying new platforms all the time. So, but yeah, if you just Google me, I'm pretty easy to find.
I think that's what I like about you the most. You're willing to try.
Yeah, I mean, well,
try seems to be a theme.
Yeah, you got to give it a shot. What's life all about otherwise? Like you said at the beginning, right? It's like about the journey. Like, I don't know, there's no place to get to. That's what, as soon as people, the place that you get to, I mentioned this earlier, but the place that you get to is that you're dead eventually. So, enjoy the process of getting there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.